of sensuality, sexuality imminent, in many of your stories, but it never quite reaches fruition. There's this, a lot of the short story has this atmosphere where it seems imminent. Can you sort of tell us something about that?
Yes, I can tell you about that, and I'm happy that you asked it. Not merely sensuality, but also violence, latent violence and latent sensuality. And I think this is very much a part of families we live in, the middle class families. So many emotions are subterranean. It never comes on the surface. You see, we speak a lot. We Indians are we talk a lot, but when it comes to deeper questions of relationships, we are very silent people. It is a strange paradox at least about us middle class people. The most important problems a son would not tell to his father. He would have to choose either his mother or his sister to convey what he feels to his father. As if father is a god and sisters and brothers are the smaller gods, Ganeshas and Hanumans, and through him he has to reach the bigger god. And this creates lot of zones of silence. Sensuality is also the same thing. I mean, do we use the word "I love you" in Hindi? I mean, it will look very crude, and yet the joy of writing in Hindi is that you want to express the same feeling of sensuous love by not using the words which are used in English, but going round and round, beating about the bush, as it were, and then trying to create that sort of a attachment, or feeling of attachment.
Nirmal's search for authenticity has intensified over the years as he's trained to move away from social and emotional stereotypes to represent the multi-layered nature of experience. He will not predispose the reader. He wants the reader to share in the ambiguity of things. In this movement, his plots and geographical locales have become increasingly shadowy.
I have stopped naming, for example, the characters. I wouldn't say that Lata said this thing or Latika said this thing. She, the girl, or the man. There are some stories where only the pronouns are mentioned, because I felt that it is not necessary to specify the names. But on the other hand, I think that the scaffolding of the locale and the uniqueness of these two persons should be very clear in my mind before I do away with the names. Doing away with the names do not make them either indistinct or using a very big word as universal types or representatives of nothing of the sort. They are very unique persons, but somehow I hesitated to give a particular, sometimes a name becomes a barrier between a reader and the story.
So why do you feel that?
Suppose there is a story which the situation is in Prague or in London, and I want to keep it ambiguous whether it is an Indian character or an English character, or a Czech girl and an Indian boy. The moment you come to know, it becomes something more sociological, that here is that an Indian boy falling in love with a Czech girl or something of the sort, this set pattern. But while I am trying to create a situation in which the two people are trying to understand one another entirely in a different context, not in the interracial or intercultural context. In that sense, I feel that the names sometimes become a barrier. Even in India, for example, some of the stories which I have written, sometimes this is not so much a conscious problem. I feel that father and child, for example, there is a story, Hill Station, where husband, wife and the child. And husband is an architect, wife is very loving, and the child is child. And they are going to relive their honeymoon on a hill station, which they of which they had very fine memories. And they always tell the child that we are going to the mountains. And the child is very curious how the mountains look. So when they go to the hill station and they say these are the mountains, the child feels very disillusioned because he sees the roads, the parks, but the mountains are still very far. And this is also reflected in the relationship of men and women, because they also feel that the love they had with one another years ago when they came for the honeymoon is also as remote as the mountains.
Much of Nirmal's success lies in the superlative use of the Hindi language, which he sustains across his large corpus of essays, short stories, novels and travelogues.
मैंने सोचा था वो बाहर चले गए हैं, इसलिए निश्चित होकर बत्ती जलाई थी। उन्हें देखकर मैं डर सा गया, जैसे पीले अंधेरे में कोई प्रेत छाया दिखाई दे गई हो। हालांकि वो वहीं बैठे थे, जैसे मैं उन्हें रोज देखता था, पलंग पर झुके हुए, पार्टी पर टांगे लटकाए हुए। रोशनी की चकाचौंध से वो कुछ हकबका से गए, मिचमिचाती आंखों से मुझे देखने लगे। आधा टहलने नहीं गए, मैंने पूछा, और जाने ही वाला था। वो अपनी सिगरेट की डिब्बी खोलने लगे, एक के बाद एक सिगरेटों के टूटे भाग झांकने लगे। वो आधी पीकर आधी छोड़ देते थे। इससे एक सिरे पर अपनी इच्छा, दूसरे सिरे पर डॉक्टर की हिदायत, आधे आधे पूरे हो जाते थे। कुछ देर तक वो असमंजस में इन मुंह झौसे टूटों से खेलते रहे, फिर वो उठ खड़े हुए।
Unfortunately, much of the uniqueness of Nirmal's ambient quill is lost in translations like A Rat Called Happiness and Dark Dispatches. But on the flip side, since there are no translations of his essays and travelogues, Nirmal's political affiliations are obscured for an English readership.
For me, I became a member of the party when I was in my MA in 48-49, and I was a very committed person. I thought that
you were a card-holding communist?
I thought that the revolution is in the corner and all that stuff. And though I was in St. Stephen's College, we were just a small group of people because it had a very conservative atmosphere, and we were just like so some outside. But we thought that, and there was a lot of idealism and romanticism along with that. But when the Soviet invasion of Hungary took place, that was one great shock, that one socialist country can send tanks to another socialist country, which was completely unimaginable, because we were nurtured in this sort of a belief that there is a sort of an international solidarity.
Where were you at this point? You talked about 1956?
I was in India.
You were in India?
I was in India.
And any other political...
The other was the Prague Spring when I was in Czechoslovakia, when I saw the entire Stalinistic bureaucratic structure melting down and being dismantled, and the tremendous intellectual resurgence which took place in Czechoslovakia in 67, 68. I was very much a witness to this change, and I was also very much associated with the writers' organization in Czechoslovakia. So it had a very important influence upon my way at looking things like bureaucracy, like dictatorship, like inhumanism, unhuman acts in the name of humanity. So when I came back to India, I for the first time discovered Gandhi as somebody who really knew more about revolution and life and India than I could ever imagine I knew under Marxism and communism.
So in a sense, Gandhi was the reality versus the illusion that was Marxism.
Yes, yes, you can say that. I would say that I felt that I have awakened from a long sleep, that I was dreaming something, and now I have awakened to some reality, and I have to grapple with that reality. I may fail to understand it or live up to it, but this is the truth that has to be faced.
But did that alter your artistic sensibility in any way?
Well, even when I was a Marxist, Marxism as an ideology had very little impact upon my writing. And this is again very strange that one can have ideologies and thoughts on one level, and one entire experiential world entirely on a different level, and they may not meet as clearly as we wish them to meet. Whatever I felt about Gandhi's history and the culture which I began to write in my essays. And essays was a part of my thinking which I thought I would not be able to capture even the emotional images of the stories, but I can do it conceptually in my essays.
You were talking earlier about re-finding a certain kind of Hindu rootedness that you have. Is this making you, do you see anything in common here with the kind of right-wing turn to Hinduism that's coming about in this country?
Oh no, what I mean by term Hinduism is in very much cultural terms. It has nothing to do with the institutionalized expressions of Hinduism. Hinduism for me is a tradition, it's a way of life, it's a way of looking at reality, the way at which I should connect myself with others, with nature, with something which I consider to be God or not God, whatever you may say. It is my whole mode of apprehending the totality of the world in which I am living.
So you would still define yourself as an atheist Hindu?
Agnostic Hindu, yes.
The implicit web of influences that informs Nirmal's apprehension of the world began with gossamer memories of his elder sister and grandfather, who coaxed him to read with the promise of coins. Since then, the adult Nirmal has found inspiration in the mystical configuration of colors and in movies that capture, in his words, very violent, disruptive events through non-disruptive images. For those who allege that he has failed to move away from the concerns that engaged him a couple of decades ago, Nirmal has a typically well thought out answer.
I think that old things are like old features of a writer. A writer may grow old, but he doesn't change into a different man. You get wrinkles on your face, your face becomes withered, but the basic anatomy of your body remains the same. So also the basic psychological and emotional structure of your life doesn't change with time. And that is the only stock from which you get your plot and your stories and your images.
Startled by a sudden downpour, Rishi ran up the steps of the veranda and rang the bell. But everything inside was still. No sound, no shuffle of footsteps shattered the silence. Perhaps there was no one at home, and he was standing in front of an empty house. With a sigh of relief, he thought that he could turn back without confronting anyone, without having to answer any awkward questions, that he could return to his refuge in the library, wait at the window of his own house for all that the future might bring. No, I can't escape so easily. I will have to try once more.